They came not for gold, but for bodies, and the human cost of 793 AD still echoes in the earth. Discover the forgotten history the records refuse to name, revealing what happens when sanctuary becomes the very magnet for collapse, and how the violence intended to destroy one faith ultimately spread it across the northern world. You are pressed between rough planks and the bodies of those who shared your vows. The hold is a breathing darkness, thick with the sour odor of salt, stale fish, and rising fear. While a rope bites into your wrists, a constant, abrasive reminder that the external world has imposed a new, painful certainty. And above you, the sound of the ocean is a muffled roar, each wave a heavy footstep marching toward an unknown coast, making you taste the sharp, metallic tang of panic on your tongue as the rhythmic groaning of the longship signals not a journey, but a terrible sentence pronounced upon your life. This is the real cost of the Viking Age. Just 6 days ago, the world was defined by the thin protective light of the east window and the ritual smell of beeswax and sacred vellum. You remember singing Compline beneath the crucifix, believing the vast, chaotic world was ordered by the bells of the cloister. But now your identity, once consecrated by the habit, has been stripped away, and hands, clinical and cold, examined your teeth, judged your youth, and assigned your monetary worth, shifting the measure of your existence instantly from a servant of God to an item of trade in a brutal northern market. A terrifying new system where every civilization is built on suffering the chroniclers refused to name. The tragedy that unfolded was swift. Monks met their tragic end at the choir stalls. The abbess was condemned in the cloister garden, and those who fell under the iron blade now lie where the spilled wine and bell ropes mingled. You do not dare look toward the horizon for hope, focusing instead on the small, sharp certainty of hunger and the structured discipline it enforces, which is not merely physical pain, but a profound decision whether to hold your faith as a treasured talisman or to fold it away, a secret stone hidden in your mouth. This is the uncomfortable truth about the raid that changed history. The authority that governs the hold is not an invitation, it is a clinical assessment. As the men raiders from the northern seas move with the detached economy of those who trade in human beings as others trade in livestock or grain, inspecting the women, separating the able from the broken, the youngest from the oldest. Though you count your age as 15 seasons, you are no longer Sister Hilder. You are now designated by a new vocabulary, perhaps throw, a term that later historians will gloss as captive or slave, marking how the consecrated body became quantifiable currency in this dark chapter of history. You hear the terrible scrape of metal on timber as they chain a woman who screams until the sound itself seems to blink out, the distant light. Instinctively you try to summon a memory of holiness, your hands folded at the lectern, the quiet peace of prayer, but the memory is brittle, like sacred parchment, repeatedly dampened and dried. And as the vessel pitches, the relentless water moves against the hull with the crushing patience of time. The shore recedes, the island of sanctuary shrinking to a dark stain on the northern weather, leaving you suspended in a void. Learn what really happened when the Vikings came for the sacred women. In the suffocating darkness, you hear others whisper the names you had learned from the choir book, Abbess Elflad, Brother Tilwine. But you also hear a different set of names, the rough cadence of the men who possess you. They speak of a captain, a Hafthia, sea lord, whom later Norse sagas will record only fleetingly, and chroniclers will call him a man who rode the waves like a long, sharp blade. Yet the systematic silence of contemporary Anglo-Saxon records regarding the details of your plight feels like an additional historical violence. Discover why the Vikings left so few written records of their captures. You feel the long ship consume the sea, and the taste of iron on your tongue remains a phantom echo of the altar stone left open to the smoke. And your life is rapidly reordering itself around immediate cues, the specific rhythmic grind of the timber, the distinct rattle of the chains, the short, heavy step of a boot approaching your corner. You recall the treasures the raiders took, the the jeweled cross, the illuminated gospel, and the monks once argued whether these relics were a blessing or a dangerous temptation, an argument that ended abruptly when the men came ashore under a sky promising nothing but ruin. This is the chilling fate of the treasures and the people they failed to protect. The raiders treat the monks' gold with dismissive roughness, as if the sacred objects were merely flotsam dragged from the water, while below deck the women fold themselves into small interior deaths, a necessary strategy for navigating this new reality. This is the beginning of a life defined by the cold calculation of others, a world built on the relentless assessment of bodies, measured by age, dental condition, and the absence of scars. And this first fortnight establishes the terrifying physics of unfettered control. Learn the survival secrets of the captured women that historians overlooked. The sailors descend periodically to check their stock, and when a woman is hauled up by her hair for an inspection, you hear the man spit out the name of a god you have never been taught, a sound of raw, brutal power. The abbess, who once commanded the respect of the cloister, had her throat slit on the sand, her past authority now serving only the cold, destructive power of the sea. And though not recorded by name in the great chronicles, the suffering of the communities is palpable in Irish lamentations and the furious, elegant letters of men like Alcuin of York. Hear the unheard lamentations of the Viking age. To survive, you concentrate fiercely on the base immediate external details, the sharp smell of pine tar, the way the coarse rope chafes skin raw, the small desperate economies the other women practice. One presses a scrap of wool into her breast hoping to warm a child. No one will acknowledge. And by the second week, the men begin to introduce you to a new vocabulary, a language of shame, forcing you to cover your head and dragging you past looted altars, laughing as they toss pages of scripture, watching the vellum shiver upon the deck. This is the hidden language of Viking captivity. You learn the sickening cadence of the threat, the initial assessment, the division, and the ritualized decision that will determine your future. Will you be kept in a household, traded at a distant market, or assigned to a warrior as a concubine? Every man on the deck who looks upon you acts as a judge in a law you never consented to and barely understand. And this terrifying uncertainty serves as a persistent, low-level anxiety, a constant micro-tension driving every hour. Discover the ancient system of assessment that determined a woman's fate. By the third week, the ship reaches land, along a rugged coast that will later be codified in sagas and charters, and the men chant a rough sound that registers as triumph. Your own fragile hope evaporates instantly under the sun as you are hauled toward a thrall house, a complex of structures that modern archaeologists will later excavate, grafting the word for slave house onto layers of earth and pottery. See the chilling archaeological proof of Viking slave houses. You are washed, not out of any perceived charity, but because a captive with visible blemishes or lice fetches less in the commerce of human trafficking. A hardened woman with a scarred hand, perhaps a wife or an overseer, examines you with the detached focus of a seasoned trader inspecting livestock, posing clinical, rapid-fire questions. Can you bear children? Are you literate? Do you know herbal cures? She uses her thumb to check your teeth, seeking biological markers for fertility. And you remain silent, knowing that any assertion could be used immediately to construct a more profitable sale. Learn the clinical methods used to value captured women. In the days that follow, a priest of the northern gods will pronounce who among you is destined for public ritual, and who will be distributed into private households. You witness a small, fierce revolt when another woman flattens her chest, bites the hand that lifts her veil, and screams the names of her saints into the air. But the resistance is violently ended with a leather strip, and the knowledge that open defiance is a costly, loud luxury. Thrall House is the critical threshold, and you pass through it, categorized and stamped. No longer an individual, this is the ultimate cost of defiance in the Viking Age. The ritual they call blot is not private. It occurs in a designated clearing, a public spectacle witnessed by neighbors, men, women, and children, and later Family sagas will describe this moment as a lawful claiming. A captive woman is positioned upon the altar stone. The Godhi priest presents a bowl of blood, perhaps from a slain horse, and the master then cuts his own palm, and hands are bound together, declaring a blood bond. You feel the simple obedience of your former life evaporate utterly in that single moment of forced, ritualized transformation. Witness the dark ritual that erased Christian identity. What remains is the brutal, undeniable physics of flesh and ultimate control. Observers will later attempt to sanitize this act by calling it marriage in the sagas, seeking to justify lineage, while clerical writers will brand it profanation. And though both narratives seek to make the act comprehensible, neither can restore what the violence took. The women chosen for this ritual are selected not for any affection, but for public spectacle, a dramatic, ritualized demonstration of absolute, irreversible domination. Discover the truth behind the saga's claims of lawful marriage. When the master marks the captive, and the observing crowd lets out a sustained roar, the ritual has successfully transformed her into defined property under the law of these northern men. You have moved entirely from the protection of the altar to the authority of a man who wears a knife at his hip, and the world is now a network of households across which you may be passed, or to which you will remain tethered by a lineage you did not choose. Some of you will later be labeled Frilla Krishna, Christian concubine, a phrase recovered by historians, fiercely debated but terrifyingly real. How captive women became codified as property. The first household you enter smells distinctly of peat smoke and stale beer, and the master's wife assesses you with sharp, calculating eyes. Is this new woman a threat, a necessary laborer, or an enhancement to her own status? Some wives will be cruel, viewing you as a rival for attention or status, while others, recognizing the shared vulnerability under the same man's absolute decisions, will extend small, confounding acts of kindness, making this domestic environment a complex, confusing labyrinth of allegiance. Uncover the hidden politics of Viking households. You are immediately set to grueling work, mending cloth, spinning wool, preparing food. Your literacy, once devoted to the service of God, may now be converted into household capital, perhaps reading simple letters for the master, or even teaching the master's children. And there is a quiet, profound, private violence in this conversion, as you are compelled to speak to a small child in a language you do not know well, teaching them a prayer you can no longer openly utter. See how Christian skills were weaponized for Viking power. In time, you will find yourself repeating the sacred names learned in the choir to lull an infant to sleep, using these prayers like secret tethering threads, anchoring a small life you never intended into your hidden core. Pregnancy soon arrives, for many of you as the Norse highly valued fertility, which represented wealth and strength, and your body is now a vessel in this new political economy. With no official protection for a captive who becomes with child, the devastating reality of forced motherhood in the Viking Age, births are often attended only by other thralls. There is no midwife trained in the organized ways of the monastery, and mortality rates are high. So you quickly learn of the profound physical injuries that leave women permanently broken by delivery. Terms like obstetric fistula are unknown to you, but the physical reality of debilitating injury is immediate and present, and women who survive these repeated labors become physically weary, their bodies altered irrevocably by the relentless cycle of conception. Discover the high cost of childbirth for Viking captives. The moral calculus of the Christian world, though different, offers little rescue. Contemporary Anglo-Saxon and Frankish chroniclers record these raids with eloquent outrage, marking 793 AD as a year of terror, naming places and describing utter devastation. But their primary focus is fixed on the theft of gold and the sacrilege. They fail to tell the granular daily fates of the women taken, a historical silence that historians argue was not accidental. Why did Christian chroniclers ignore the fate of the captive women? The men who took you do not cease their work. They refine the system by which they extract wealth and labor from coastal sites, returning to the shores of Britain, Ireland, and the Frankish lands. each successful raid providing a template for the next. For you, the true arc of history is not an annal entry, but the slow, tactical accumulation of daily strategies. How to conceal a small cross, how to quickly braid hair in secret, how to make your body just visible enough for protection and just invisible enough to avoid hands that count. Learn the subtle strategies of endurance that defined the captivity. The Norse practice of taking women from holy places is cemented in multiple sources. Later Icelandic
sagas, continental annals, and scattered genealogies showing English names woven into Scandinavian family trees. Historians gather these diffuse traces, isotopic evidence in teeth that suggests a childhood spent on another shore, or graves with mixed iconography. A woman's burial site in the Orkneys containing both a Christian cross and a Thor's hammer offers chilling visceral proof that the boundaries between captive and conqueror were porous and deeply etched into the human bones. The stunning evidence found in Viking graves. Your days settle into a grim rhythm of labor and secret, tenacious resistance. You may teach a child his first words in Latin at night. You carve a cross onto a scrap of wood and hide it beneath the straw. And these actions are inherently dangerous, yet they are the critical devices of survival. You learn how to invert ritual, transforming prayer into a hidden tactic, and the child you teach the sign of the cross to may use that gesture decades later to bless a wedding or open a market. Consequences you cannot foresee, but that hold immense, unmeasured weight. How Christian resistance was waged in secret. The legal status of children born to thralls remained ambiguous, often codified only later in laws like the Gragas, and that terrible uncertainty whether a child would be acknowledged as a son of the house or left with no claim shaped every decision. Escape was rare and treacherous, but the stories of those who fled or were ransomed circulated as both a desperate hope and a grim warning. Yet, for the majority, true resistance lay in the quieter acts, the teaching of the Lord's Prayer to a granddaughter who would eventually bring it into a royal court, altering a king's conscience, the enduring legacy of the Friller and their children. The transformation of Scandinavian religious practice in the centuries following the raids is complex, as Christianity arrived through kings and merchants, but also through the intimate, persistent devotion of captive women. They were the
ones who maintained Christian practice within private households, teaching the prayers and preserving the relics. And the ultimate irony is bitter. The violence intended to humiliate and destroy a faith became inadvertently the vehicle that helped spread it, a spread whose cost was paid not abstractly, but by specific, suffering bodies. This is the real way Christianity spread across the Viking North. History does not offer easy comfort. The women taken from Lindisfarne and other houses were stolen, violated, and forced into new lives, and their names were often lost. But their endurance left indelible traces in language, in lineage, and in the religious shifts of a northern world. If this story made you reflect on the fragility of power, stay with us for the next chapter as we walk further into history's shadows. With us,